Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Brian Livingston. I'm the Executive Director of the Arizona Police Association. The Arizona Police Association counts approximately 22 individual member associations in its fold and has approximately 9,500 active members in its ranks. Let me speak perfectly clear. The APA opposes this bill. We do believe that reform is necessary for the pension systems in light of the condition of both the PSPRS and court funds. I speak only of these two funds because those are the only two funds that my members deal with. The APA understands and supports the Arizona constitutional protections afforded our pensions in Article 29, Section C, to wit, membership in the public retirement system is a contractual relationship that is subject to Article 2, Section 25, and public retirement systems shall not be diminished or impaired, end quote. In strengthening our argument, I look to the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, which states, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post fact law, or law impairing the obligation of contract, or grant any title of nobility. Finally, we rely on many subsequent court decisions that have upheld these provisions. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the information that is being passed out to committee members now do indeed contain those court decisions. Before I go further, I would like to discuss a little history with the committee, the APA's involvement in the pension problem. My membership asked me to inquire of our pension system and why our pension system lost so much of its value in the years 1998 to 2000. We had received many discussions from PSPRS showing there was a spike in the pension systems at the turn of the century and again from 2007 to the current day. What we were told was this was an after effect of 2001. September 11th, 2001 to be exact. Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, we found that is not true. In fact, there were some very high-risk investments made in the fund by the fund manager, maybe or maybe not approved by the board at that time, which cost the fund $1.6 billion. If we would not have lost $1.6 billion, we would not be having this discussion today. The question I cannot answer for my board is whose fiduciary responsibility was it to oversee those investment strategies? Who approved the transactions noted in the email we received from the current administrator, which I would now like to read to you verbatim. It was addressed to my colleague, Dr. Levi Bolton. Quoting. First, before I quote, it was a question posed to the fund administrator by Dr. Bolton. This was the reply we had from the fund administrator. Your email makes reference to the past when the fund suffered devastating losses. I assume you're referring to what happened in fiscal years 2001 and 2002, when the system's plans had a minus 16.9% and minus 15% rate of return, respectively, and had asset value losses on a combined plan basis of approximately $1.6 billion. These losses were far in excess of losses the fund would have sustained if the rates of return of the plans had been in line with what happened in the financial markets generally at that time. The excess losses that the plans experienced during those years were a result of, and I quote, over-concentration of the system's internally managed portfolios in the securities, both stocks and bonds, of high technology and telecommunication companies based in the United States. When the so-called telecom bubble began to deflate, the PSPRS fund was disproportionately impacted. So why was there such an over-concentration in tech and telecom securities? The answer is that the systems administrator at that time, Mr. Jack Cross, had made the decision to build up and maintain the over-concentration in the hope that the tech and telecom portions of the U.S. stock market and bond markets would continue to outperform all other segments of those financial markets just as they had done in the past years in the 1990s. Unfortunately, and this is a very important comment, Mr. Cross's high-risk bet, again, high-risk bet, did not pay off, and consequently, the PSPRS fund sustained losses that it did. Mr. Cross was, of course, a paid member of PSPR staff. He retired in 2004. These losses occurred just prior to that retirement, as adding to not part of the comments. The only external advisor or consultant that Jack Cross was using at the time was Standard & Poor's. However, we do not know to what extent, if any, Standard & Poor's representatives had input with respect to Jack Cross's decision to overweight the in-house stock and bond portfolios to Tecnon Telecom. We know of no documents. Again, I reiterate, no documents that might shed light on what advice they may have given to Mr. Cross. He continues, we assume that Mr. Cross was keeping the persons who were members of the board at that time informed. Assume of what he was investing in. But even this, we can only speculate about. Since Jack Cross was the administrator, he could have considerable control over what information was disclosed to the board members. They might have known only what Mr. Cross wanted them to know. But again, we do not know and cannot know for sure because of the lack of documentation. Those few staff members who were at the system at the time and who are still here had nothing to do with the investments and can shed no light on what the board members did or did not know. End quote. Mr. Chairman, no documents on investment decisions. No documentation on what the board or board did not know. This is very, very disturbing to the Arizona Police Association. If I may go back. So why do I bring this up? My police, detention, and correction officers have been publicly vilified, criticized for being greedy and self-serving. We have been told that our pension system was too inflated and that the taxpayers were now going to be stuck with bailing out our pension system. In reality, it was a bureaucratic blunder of epic proportions that caused us to lose $1.6 billion in fund dollars. If this money had not been gambled, relating to the term bet in what I just read to you, using the email from the current administrator as a reference, we would most likely be here today. The fund would be fine, lower in value, but still sustainable. Now that we understand what got us here, the APA began looking at other negative costs to the fund. One thing we found were excessive legal costs being charged to the fund in the order of $200,000 to $300,000 a month. Even in layman's math, and I would consider myself a layman, that is a yearly legal cost of $2.4 to $3.6 million. Why were these costs so high? We discovered that questions and issues posed to legal counsel dispersed throughout the country to as many as 28 attorneys at one time. They were set to specific lawyers. That's incredible. A legal question posed to 28 legal counsels at once? At what cost? For what reason? We're still waiting on those answers to that question. How much were the hourly costs for services for these legal advisors? How was that cost determined? Who approved the payment for those legal costs? Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we don't know. We haven't found answers yet. In regards to the drop, another publicly vilified benefit that we've said. Both the fund manager and the Board of Trustees, current, acknowledge that drop causes little disruption to the fund's financial status. Drop is nothing more than a savings account for members that would have been given money from the retirement system anyway. all the money they receive at the end of the drop program would have been dispersed on a monthly basis during the time they were in the drop instead of kept in a savings account. Do they achieve an interest on that money that they leave in the account while they perform the drop or are in the drop system? Yes, they do. But the benefits to those members who are in drop and what they do for our cities and towns is well worth the small amount of interest that they obtain. From there, I've handed out information about the drop and some of the legal consequences of diminishing that benefit. I won't go into that. Please look at that at your pleasure. So why did we go through the exercise of looking back? Because in the current proposal, the Speaker of the House, somebody we greatly admire, says that we are going to need tremendous increases in employee contributions rates. And the reason for those contributions rates are reportedly to sustain the system, when in fact they are really used to decrease the employer contribution rate that's going to be necessary in the upcoming years. It's very important for the committee to know that the employers prior to the year 2000 paid little to nothing into our system. It was the members who sustained that system. It was the members whose contributions made it a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar system. Now, because of an administrator's failure, or the fund's failure, whichever way it turns out to be, and the economic decline that we experienced from 2007 through the current day, we're going back to those members to say, give us more. It's your fault. Mr. Assistant Chairman and members of the committee, I find that remarkable. I find that remarkable. Further, we're talking about taking away the cost of living increase for our retirees. The retirees in our system only get money into the excess earnings account when the fund makes 9% interest gains on the money it's invested. It's not for every single dollar that comes in. It's after 9% is already gained. And then they only get 1/2 of 1% when it goes above that number. That was a contractual relationship they knew about, they signed on to, when they signed on to be a police officer, correction officer, or firefighter. That was something they knew they were going to receive. And now we're talking about totally eliminating, breaking the contract that may have persuaded them to be a police officer, firefighter, corrections officer at the beginning of their service. Again, there's a decision made somewhere that is our fault, and it's their fault. We have proposed. We don't come here empty-handed. We have proposed, and I brought that to Mr. Chairman on Tuesday, to help make the system whole. It does not affect current retirees. It does not affect current members, so it falls in line of the constitutions, both of the United States and Arizona. We ask you to consider this. We realize it's a second-tier system that will decrease retirement benefits for those that are hired after the date of enactment. But we also know we have 25 years, if that plan is accepted, to increase those benefits as the fund itself increases in its bottom line. So it's an acceptable challenge. Taking what's already there, what you, the state of Arizona, has agreed to, is not acceptable. But we also acknowledge that you have to get this bill moving in order to make the changes that are necessary to the fund. We don't like this bill. We will support any measure you have, and we honestly want to work with you to satisfy the needs of the state and make this a good bill, not one that will have to be challenged. And with that, sir, I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.